Beyond the headlines, the noise, the spin, we seek the stories that live within. Past party lines, past powers disguised, we hear the truth in everyday lives. A space for voices both gentle and strong, beyond politics where we all belong.
Hello everyone and welcome to Oz Arab Media. Today we're honoured to be joined by Andrew Condon, who commanded the Australian Defence Force Joint Task Force responsible for evacuating thousands of Australians from Lebanon during the 2006 Lebanon War. 20 years later, Operation RAMP remains Australia's largest non-combatant evacuation operation since the Second World War. It was a mission that required extraordinary cooperation between the Australian Defence Force, DFAT, foreign governments and emergency agencies, ultimately bringing more than 5,300 Australians safely home. Today, we will look back at the remarkable operation, the human stories behind it, and the lessons that continue to shape Australia's response to international crisis. Andrew, welcome to the show and thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Christine. My pleasure to be here.
Of course, it's our pleasure to... Andrew, before we talk about the evacuation itself, can you take us back to July 2006? What was really happening in Lebanon? And at what point did you realise that Australia was facing a major humanitarian crisis?
Yeah, look, going back to 2006, and context is important. The Lebanese people had been experiencing for decades, really since the war of the 1980s, lots of skirmishes and military activity across the border into Lebanon, and unfortunately getting quite used to that happening. And then when we get to 2006, there's an incident where Hezbollah forces raid across the border. They capture some IDF soldiers, bring them back into Lebanon. The IDF response is to lock down Lebanon so they can't be escaped or taken back to another country, Syria or Iran. And effectively, they locked down Lebanon by bombing the Beirut airport. They bomb the exits, road exits, and they put in a maritime blockade. So no one can get out. And so that was sort of the build-up to it. And very quickly, lots of people caught inside, couldn't get out. And how I first heard about it, and that I would be involved, I was in a role on standby to command Australia's military response to any humanitarian disasters around the world. And so I, at that time, I think the 12th of July, at the time I was actually on an exercise outside of Townsville, a place called High Range Training Area. On the 14th, I came in from that exercise. I was at the officers' mess getting changed to get on a flight back to Sydney. And I remember going to the bar and to get a drink before I headed out. And there was a TV in the background behind the bar. And so while I'm waiting for my drink, I see this coverage of what's going on in Lebanon. And it just looked horrific. Carnage, chaos, and it just wasn't looking great. And so I'm just absorbing this for the first time because I've been out of contact with the news for a couple of days. But I still remember vividly a clip of two women sitting on some steps out the front of a building, and they were two ladies that had a touring boys' choir from Bankstown during the school holidays. And they looked down the camera and they said...
You gave me goosebumps. Yes.
They looked down the camera and they said, we're Australians, we're here and we want some service.
Wow.
And the camera pans back and then you see the sign above them says Australian Embassy, and it pans back a bit further and then you see the sign closed, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what a mess. Thank heavens I'm not involved in that.
Yet. Not involved yet. Wow. That is That is a story, and we haven't started yet. Tell me, so you said you were on standby back then. What was it like personally when you received the call to duty, if I can say, that you'll be leading this operation?
Yeah, let me give you some context on what standby means.
Yeah.
So those of us who've been in the military who are put into these roles are familiar with the requirement to be ready to go at very short notice. So
Okay.
you'd be in your office, your field pack is there next to your desk with all its gear, your paperwork, your passports, proof of vaccination,
Wow.
your wills in order, all that sort of stuff. And you could be, called, and all that was ordered and checked regularly. You'd have these call-out parades, and you'd have to have all that checked.
Okay.
So I was in that role, and because I knew I was on call for some sort of potential humanitarian disaster, my predecessor the year before had gone to northern Pakistan, leading an Australian contingent for 6 months after an earthquake there. And so I had become addicted to listening to news radio.
Wow.
Listening for breaking news stories around the world. An example of that, I remember early in my time, 2006, Sunday morning, on my way to my daughter's, take my family to my daughter's under-12 soccer game at the Willoughby Sports Centre. And over the radio comes this breaking news story about an earthquake in Jakarta. And I said to my wife quietly, this could get interesting. Anyway, get to the ground. I find that I'm the rostered-on parent to referee the first half of the game. I'm doing that. And then as I'm racing around the field, I feel my mobile phone ringing, and I'm thinking, oh, gee, I better have a quick look at it. So I look at the phone, and I can see it's the Chief of Operations at Victoria Barracks calling on a Sunday morning from his work phone, not his mobile phone. And I'm thinking, I better answer that. So I quickly answer it and explain what I'm doing. And he said, look, you need to get in here. Have you heard about Jakarta? Because the government's looking for a military response. You'll be leading it. So I think, okay, well, I've got to go. And the ball goes out, I blow the whistle. I look down the line of all the parents. I spot another parent who's on the referee roster.
Just come straight.
From 30 metres, I start throwing him the whistle and you're out to him, mate, you're going to have to take over. I've got to go to work. I run down the field a bit further. I spot my wife, get my car keys out, throw her the car keys and say, look, I've got to get to work. I'll let you know what I'm doing. And then just, race off to the Willoughby Road to hail down a cab and sort of look back, and I can just see my daughter and everybody just looking at me, but I haven't got time to wait and explain. But
what a movie content!
But that's the sort of context of
standby.
What standby means and how quickly you can be expected to react.
Amazing. And how was it in regards to Lebanon? How did it happen? Being called from standby to on duty. Yeah.
So initially when I was watching that on the news, I didn't think that was sort of my role. It was. I was looking for earthquakes, tsunamis. We'd supported the tsunami in Aceh in Indonesia in 2004. And this was a war zone, and it was what they call a non-combatant evacuation operation, and that role was really for the group in the high readiness group in Townsville. Not where I was, based out of Randwick, but that group in Townsville weren't there because they'd just previously been activated to go into Timor because Ramos Horta, there had been an assassination attempt on him, and so
everything is happening at once in the world.
we sent a big force out of Townsville in there to stabilise Timor. As this event is escalating, and I got the sense that our government, every other government around the world was sort of thinking, well, this could be over in a couple of days. How long will it go?
The regular Lebanon War.
These things happen quite regularly. But then after 4 or 5 days, everyone's realising, no, it's continuing to escalate. This is big. We need to do something. And so, about 5 days in, I get a call at my office to say, look, it's not going well for DFAT. Government wants a military option to consider. So, you need to come into our next level headquarters to do some planning. I got that call about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I eventually get home at about 11:30 at night, sit on the end of the bed, wake up my wife and say, look,
I'm leaving.
I don't know if you've heard, about the news. It's getting worse. I can't tell you much until there's been a public announcement, but depending on what the government decides tomorrow, I'm not coming home. I'll more than likely be heading off, which is exactly what happened.
Wow. It's a very interesting, but, on the minute kind of life, if we can say. Now, you did mention that not many people were realizing how big this is getting or how large this operation has become. Can you paint a picture for us of what Australia was facing in those few days and just how many Australians were really suddenly stranded in Lebanon?
Yeah, look, the figures are quite astounding. I hadn't realised, and I suspect a lot of people hadn't, but we go back to the 12th of July when it all started. At that point, there were 2,500 Australians registered with the Australian Embassy in Beirut.
Okay.
So, which I thought was a pretty big number that, as travellers, were meant to either log somehow that they're in Lebanon. And so very quickly people, did that. Within 4 or 5 days, once, things started to escalate, that number had grown to 12,500 people had registered. And we were being given numbers that the estimate of Australians who potentially were in Lebanon could be as high as 25,000.
Oh my
They were
Lord.
big numbers. And look, other nations had similar numbers. The Canadians had big numbers, the French, US. And so the world was reacting and starting to send all their military capabilities that they had in the region in to help.
Well, look, speaking in July, it'd be beginning of summer, so a lot of people would be heading home to families and trying to enjoy the holidays, but the war called otherwise. Now, once the Joint Task Force was established, what were the biggest logistical and operational challenges that your team encountered while trying to evacuate thousands of Australians from an active war zone, they called it? So tell us more about that.
It was the scale of the problem that really presented the big logistic issues. We couldn't fly people out of the airports because it was locked down. The negotiations were that we could, all the international community could come in and bring people out of ports through ships. And that was pretty easy for the Europeans, the Brits, the French, and the Americans. They all had big Navy assets nearby. But Australia was going to take us 2 weeks to get, Navy assets.
All the way to the other side of the world.
From the other side of the world. So, shipping was the most efficient way. We didn't have any, so we had to essentially charter ferries. And we got them out of Cyprus and out of the Mersin port in Turkey. And so that was our challenge, was to try and secure ferries to bring people out. But that was only really half the problem, because once we were getting people to Cyprus, the idea was that then they'd be able to fly themselves home commercially.
Yeah, true.
But as you said, it was the middle of holidays.
Yeah.
Every flight out of Cyprus was fully booked. There was just no space. And so, we then had to look at chartering 747s to come in to pick people up. But logistically, that was even a challenge, because peak holiday season, we couldn't get landing slots for these aircraft. So it was big and complex and just built on itself.
Wow, that is an adventure on its own. Now, as you mentioned, a lot of people were involved. The DFAT, the Australian Embassy, defence, airlines, ships, foreign governments as well, all together were working under enormous pressure, like within days or even hours. How did the whole of a government, if I can say, and international cooperation contribute to success this as a mission to bring everyone back home safely?
Yeah, look, I think once we all realised that this was big, the government then kicked in its crisis management processes, and so all the departments and agencies that you mentioned, then come together. They have a doctrine of emergency response teams, which were set up in Lebanon, Cyprus, and Turkey as to manage, the flow of evacuees. And then they have a crisis centre, DFAC crisis centre in Canberra, where again all those departments send in reps and they come together to plan and work through the various issues. And the other thing, perhaps people listening or watching this probably don't realise, is that what happened was the embassy in Beirut was just overwhelmed with people trying to ring in. Small staff, thousands of calls, a day, hundreds of hours sort of thing, I suspect. Couldn't cope. And so they have a procedure in place where they diverted all the calls into the embassy to a Centrelink call centre in Geelong. And these people, there's 400 odd of them, all trained in these sort of circumstances to then, take those calls, register all the people. And so, fortunately, all those things were sort of in place. And once we realised this was on, all those things started to click into place.
Wow. What a mission. Now, beyond logistics and politics, if I can put it under that umbrella, behind every evacuation number, there was a family going through fear and uncertainty, definitely. Are there any stories or moments from those days that you can share with us where they've been stuck in your memory for the past 20 years? Now, the Bankstown one was it's a big one, but is there others?
Yeah, look, there are a few. There's there was an elderly gentleman that who'd reached one of our evacuation assembly areas in Beirut, had a fall, broke his hip, and needed a hip replacement in the middle of all that chaos. So you can imagine what that was.
Dealing with Medicare on top of all of this.
Well, no, he got a hip replacement inside 24 hours in the middle of all that. That's what happened.
Wow.
When I first arrived, I saw a lady being evacuated while she was in labour as she was coming off a ship. I had memories of I suppose it's the relief of people as they're sort of finally getting off the ferries and landing in Cyprus. And perhaps on a more humorous side, I've got this example of where the Australians are very appreciative, and very relieved to see Australian uniforms there to help them. But they were being put on buses as they got off the ferries in Cyprus, and one of the sergeants, jumps on board, and the way he explains to me the story is, he's trying to manage all these people onto buses to get them from the port to where they're going to be processed and accommodated, and he's telling them, what's happening next, and what they need to do, and he's giving them instructions, and then he sort of finishes with, and move now, and he thinks, that probably came out a bit harsh than what I meant to be, and he said, before I got a chance to correct myself, the bus just burst into applause of clapping. Clearly they were very relieved and grateful that the ADF were there.
Wow, amazing stories. Now, many Australians know people who have evacuated, including myself, but few understand how the operations actually worked. Now, can you walk us through a journey of an Australian family, maybe, who would take it from registration all the way to somewhere safe?
Yeah, look, it was a number of steps.
Yes.
We had to understand that these people are traumatised.
Yes.
They're desperate for information. They want certainty. So the process was they would ring in, register, or email if they could, depending on what was working. Once they're registered, they're then notified that there was space available for them to start through the process. And the process was that, they were advised to come to what we called an evacuation assembly area. And that was a point where they were going to be picked up on a bus. And it was typically, say, the reception area of a hotel where there was shade, water, toilets, whatever, and people could muster and then come along, get their names ticked off on the bus. And we would take them to what we called Evacuation Handling Centre. And in Beirut, it was a stadium we had there. And once they were there was a whole bunch of sort of consular processing. they couldn't leave unless they had a passport,
Yes.
valid passport, because
Yeah.
it was going to be stamped, and the full border control was happening.
Yes.
And it was part of the agreements, I think, between sort of the Lebanese government and the Israeli government and everyone else internationally about how this would be managed.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of people who actually didn't have current Australian
Passports.
passports.
Wow.
I remember one time we flew into the embassy in a helicopter, 2,000 blank passports, so we could reissue people new passports because their passports had expired. So once all that consular activity had occurred at the evacuation handling centre at the stadium, and a ferry was arriving, they would then bus to the port, and at the port, Lebanese authorities would check that their passports are all in order. Then onto the ferries, and then a sea journey to either Cyprus, which was a couple of hours, or to Mersin in Turkey, which was about 8 hours.
Yeah.
Which is pretty tricky.
Yeah.
Long, a couple of days of bad sea states. People got seasick, got really rough at one stage. People broke limbs as these things. These are things the size of the River Cat. That runs from Sydney. Circular Quay to Parramatta.
Wow.
So it was pretty rough going for them, but then they would get to one of those ports. We'd do medical checks, try and get the family groupings together to then. In the end, we realised we had to give people a night's accommodation just to rest, recover, because they're pretty exhausted. First couple of attempts, we put them on plane straight away, and it was just too much. People couldn't cope with another 24 hours of flying. So we gave them a break for 24 hours in a motel. Then, bus to the airport, which was pretty close in Cyprus, but for those people, Turkey, it was a 10. I think we were taking them from an airport which is a 10-hour bus drive away. So they had another 10 hours on a bus to then get on a flight
to get there.
back to Australia.
Wow.
So was a lot of steps I've just explained there, which took 48 to 72 hours, depending where you were in Lebanon when you started, to which route you took to get home. So a lot going on there.
A lot going on there that maybe us just audience wouldn't expect what's happening there. And on top of that, maybe the safety as well, because there's war happening. So we want to be away from those shots as well. So that, let alone, is an adventure. Wow. Look, there were several remarkable milestones during the operation. Like you said, the establishment of the evacuation centres, the reopening of what they call the C-130 air badge through Cyprus, and the evacuation from Tyre in Lebanon. Now, looking back, which were the moments best captures the determination and professionalism of everyone involved? Because you did mention, we know they're tired, we know they're traumatized, we need to look at their medications. So the level of professionalism there, talk us a little bit about it.
Yeah, look, there was a lot to consider, a lot to work through. But what I think, though, is Australians are very good at working through, seeing a problem, working through it, and often coming up with innovative solutions, particularly when you've got limited resources. When I first left Australia, our initial plan that we briefed to government was that we didn't have assets in the country, and that our best solution for us was for us to actually complement the British evacuation chain, and we would send some people over there, and we would help the Brits, and we would base ourselves, because the British had an air base in Cyprus. So that was the plan. That was announced at sort of 1 o'clock on about the 19th of July, and early or late that afternoon, I was on a flight out. And so 24 hours of commercial flight to get there. I get there, call back to Canberra to see how the negotiations had gone between London and Canberra about the plan that we'd come up with, only to be told that the Brits were saying there's just not enough space for the Australians. There were already large groups of UK evacuating forces coming. They didn't have space for us. although, we were bringing a C-130 Hercules aircraft, they said we could park it there. But, no space to put our troops.
Overwhelmed.
And so on landing, we had to come up with a plan, because they sort of also told me that, there was a chartered A330 bringing, 96 ADF personnel for the Joint Task Force. That they would be arriving in 24 hours, so we needed somewhere to put them. So I hightailed it to our embassy in Cyprus after I got off the aircraft to meet the ambassador, to see what he could do to help. I meet him. He says, "Look, I've got a very small embassy, 3.2 staff. I'm going to hand it over to you. You come up with your own plan, because I can't really help you." So then I'd head over to the UK RAF base to speak to the commander there and see if I can work something out at my level, negotiate something. He's pretty sympathetic, but he said, "Look, I've got all these troops coming from the UK, I just can't help you really, although I'm happy to, you can park your C-130 here and use the airbase from an aircraft point of view, but I just can't have lots of people here. I can't have evacuees coming through here. I've got all the Brits doing that."
Wow.
Anyway, I'm thinking, well, how do we
Professionally come up with a plan.
how do we move forward with this? And so quickly I decide that, when this chartered A330 arrives with all our troops on it, it's not going back empty. We're going to put Australian evacuees on it so we can go. So it's a bit of a drama getting Australians onto the British base, but, we made that happen. And then I get a call from the Australian ambassador again, who's telling me he just had a call from the Cypriot government to say that we can't just bring all our evacuees out of Lebanon to Cyprus and just transfer the humanitarian disaster from Lebanon
to Cyprus. That's true.
You need to get them out. And I knew there's no commercial flights, how are we going to do this? So I then come up with this idea that, we'll use this C-130, which the original idea for that, I think, was that we sort of hoped that the Beirut airport might open at some point and we could fly people
back,
from Lebanon into Cyprus or Turkey on the C-130. So we had this thing, couldn't use it for that purpose. And I thought, why don't we set up an air bridge for the C-130 could fly from Cyprus to Turkey, and because the Turkey had bigger air hubs, and so we could get more people out on flights that way. And so I've got that in the back of my head, and when I'm talking to the British base commander, he says, "Look, while we can't have you here, it'd be good if you came to my morning update briefing, so we can do any deconfliction or coordination, so we know what everyone's doing." And I said, "Yep, sure enough, happy to do that." And so next morning, I turn up to my first one of those, and all the British commanders from the different units have arrived, and they're briefing what they're doing, and it gets around to me. So what are the Australians doing? I said, our Joint Task Force, is arriving. Thanks for allowing it to land here. And we've got a C-130 coming that we're taking out of Iraq at that time to use, and we're going to set up an air bridge to get our evacuees from here to Turkey. I'm in this briefing room, and everyone bursts into laughter.
Oh.
And I'm thinking, this is a bit odd, and they're carrying on about colonialism. I'm getting a bit peed off. In fact, I'm getting angry. I don't know what they're on about. And eventually the operations officer steps forward and says, "Look, there has never been a flight from Cyprus to Turkey since the War of 1974.
Oh, yeah, because...
And I'm thinking, right, okay. Anyway, the meeting ends, I walk out, and I'm bloody angry by this stage. I'm thinking, God, they just carried on.
Wow.
And so I ring the Australian ambassador, and I said, "Look, I know you said you couldn't help me, but there's one thing I want you to do for me." And he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to set up an air bridge to, you told me how I've got to move people on. I'm going to set up an air bridge with this C-130 from Cyprus to Turkey." And he says, "Oh, you're not going to be able to do that, don't you? You know about the War of 1974? Yeah, I've got that story, but I need you to get me diplomatic clearance so that can happen.
Yeah.
And there's sort of pause on the other end of the phone. And he says, well, what do you want me to say? And I said, oh, well, call it an extremist humanitarian circumstance. You know, say something in Latin. You know, you're the diplomat, you know, I'm the military guy.
You put the words together.
And so he says, oh, okay, I'll write a cable. I said, oh, okay, if that's what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, a few hours go by and he rings me back. And lo and behold, he says, you're not going to believe this, but they said yes.
Wow.
And I said, oh, that's great news. But whatever you do, don't tell the Brits because I want to tell them.
They laughed at me.
And so, next morning we're at the briefing, everyone's going around the table, saying what they're doing, and then the base commander says, oh, and so, jovially saying, so what are the Australians going to be doing today?
Yes.
Sort of thing. And I said, oh, well, you've probably noticed our C-130 has arrived and it's going to commence today its air bridge from Cyprus to Turkey. And as I've said that, the room goes quiet, deadly quiet. And I can see everyone's looking at the base commander.
Yeah.
And he sort of leans forward across the table at me and he says, under no circumstances is an aircraft leaving my airbase and causing a diplomatic incident without diplomatic clearance.
We know that, sir.
And so I sort of absorbed that, and so I leaned back towards him a little bit and said, well, sir, I can tell you the Australians have diplomatic clearance.
Yeah.
And the operations officer had been doing most of the carrying on the day before. He sort of jumps in and says, so how did you do that? And I said, hey, mate, we're Australians. We just asked.
I know, that's amazing. Wow. So the determination and professionalism, definitely, they always find a way. That's amazing. Great. Look, you have said before that helping fellow Australians during this mission was the most rewarding experience in your 27 years career in the Army. What made this operation so personally significant, though, to you?
Yeah, look, I think just the scale of what was happening, really made the difference.
Yeah.
I had experienced, I suppose, we would, and I'd seen how in my time in the military, Australians would just ordinary people put in extraordinary situations and then somehow, find a way,
Yes.
solve problems. And it was always pretty special being able to help people. We'd been involved in, as I mentioned before, helping the people in Aceh, northern Pakistan. In 2006, by this time, we had people in ADF people in Solomons helping there. We'd just finished in Bougainville with the peace process there. We had big contingents in Iraq and Afghanistan. We had peacekeepers in Sudan and various countries in the Middle East. And always thought it was, particularly if I was on the ground, I wasn't in the ground on all those things, but when you are, you wear the Australian flag on your sleeve, so you're pretty proud of what you're doing, and it's pretty special being able to help people. But I suppose what I wanted to say was, the Lebanon experience was different. It was different because, we were, helping Australians and who were very grateful for what we're doing. And I remember when we got back to Australia, a few weeks later, there was a sort of welcome home event, and the Chief of Army came up from Canberra. It was held at Victoria Barracks, and he spoke, and then I got to respond. And I remember as part of that, I said, helping people in need is always very special, but being able to help Australians is a real privilege. So that's, I suppose that was my big takeaway out of this one.
Yeah, wow. That is amazing. Look, 20 years on now, we've seen, unfortunately, instability coming back to Lebanon several times, including most recently. Now, looking back, what lessons from 2006 continue to influence, do you think, the Australia's readiness for evacuation and humanitarian crises today?
Look, I think from the machinery of government point of view, the processes they had in place, really came to the fore. And so I think the big lessons for government and all those agencies is that, they need to continue to invest in all those bits and pieces. We've got new people coming through all the time, so they've got to have training in that. They've got to rehearse it. They've got to practice it. So that all needs to continue. But I think one of the big lessons that I noted during the 2024 situation was getting information to people as quickly and as early as possible and giving them as much warning as possible. So I noted during 2024, the government was warning people to get out because they could see it building. As what turned out to be many weeks before it ultimately, came to a crunch. So that certainly gives people more opportunity. The problem back in 2006, it happened with no notice. Everyone was just trapped.
Oh, wow.
There was just no notice at all. And so everyone was playing catch up.
Right.
Whereas now I think the lesson is everyone's got good eyes on what's happening, and we know how bad it can escalate.
Yeah, wow. That's interesting to know and learn through the career. There have been a lot of ongoing efforts to secure formal recognition for personnel who served during Operation Ramp. Why is that recognition so important, in your opinion?
Look, I think when our service personnel put on the uniform, they're in a position where, they're prepared to provide service and sacrifice, and their families also provide that sacrifice. And when they do, it needs to be recognised. People will do this willingly. They're not paid at corporate rates, but, they're proud to do that. And I think as a nation, what we owe them is to recognise, what they've done. And so in the case of the Joint Task Force personnel for Operation Ramp, much to my ongoing embarrassment, the only person to have received medallic recognition for that operation was myself. During the Queen's Birthday Honours of 2007, I was privileged to be awarded a Conspicuous Service Cross as the commander, but there was no medallic recognition for the rest of the troops.
Yeah.
So I've been working on trying to get that recognition now for 20 years.
Wow.
And I'm now at a stage where I've been able to secure an open hearing with the Defence Honours and Awards Appeals Tribunal. So this is quite a process.
It's been taking a while.
But they've agreed they've got jurisdiction to hear the case that I'm putting forward. So I'm hoping in the next month or two, because I'm trying to have this all sorted by the 20th anniversary.
20th anniversary, wow, that's sweet.
That we can recognise, the efforts and the danger they were all exposed to back in those days.
Wow. Well, I mean, thank you for your efforts putting it out there, because definitely everyone deserves the recognition, as you mentioned. Look, amazing stories we've heard, but I know if I still have a lot of questions, but we barely have any time. But finally, I'd like to end it with a little humanitarian part. Many Lebanese Australians remain deeply connected to Lebanon and do still have families today there. What message would you like to share with them as they reflect on the events of 2006 and maybe the resilience and the continued support they've seen ever since?
Yeah, I suppose I'd like to say, I really feel for the people in Lebanon. They have been impacted by tragedy, on and off for decades. And my hope for them is that the diplomats of the world will come up with a solution for the whole of the Middle East. Create a vision where people can live in peace and harmony, engage in economic prosperity, education for everybody, life, can return to whatever normal is. And so, we as a world and people who've got the expertise in this space, I call them the diplomats, have to work out what that is, and then we all have to accept it and get on with implementing it, so that we can give people, a quality of life that us here in Australia are privileged to have.
That's true.
We'd love the people of Lebanon to have the privilege.
Well, we do add our hopes and prayers to yours, and hopefully one day we can get in one piece and harmony together. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your experience from one of Australia's most significant humanitarian operations. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you for having me on your show.
No worries at all. Before we go anyway, to our audience, 20 years later, Operation Ramp remains a remarkable example of courage, leadership, and cooperation in the face of crisis. More importantly, it serves as a reminder that behind every evacuation statistic is a family, is a story, and a life that has changed forever. Thank you for watching Oz Arab Media. We'll see you next time.